Alrighty. Welcome to episode 45 of Full Circle. I'm still your host, still Chad, and I'm still Cheddar Caveman on every social media sign-in thing that exists. So, as far as news goes, sort of not a lot and sort of a ton, depending, I guess, on how you look at it. But for Circle, we kind of got all of our news ahead of time. So the Theme Force is released on Friday, so that was obviously after my show on Wednesday. The Blindwater had already released. Not sure if, what out of that will be gems for us, but we'll visit that maybe maybe next week when things are sort of a little more shored up, or possibly just down the road when it's getting ready to release after I've had some time to give it some more thought and maybe a few folks have gotten a chance to play some stuff. Circles, themes, I'm just going to breeze through little bits of basically all five. We have 5 themes now. All 5 have the ability to bring a minion, unit, and a solo. So you can have a unit and a solo, or just a unit, however you choose. A few episodes back, I did talk about a few that I thought were good, that I hadn't talked about yet. I was sort of looking more specifically at Secret Masters, but that's weird. Okay, sorry guys. Yeah, I was looking more specifically at Secret Masters, but I think most of the logic will apply, especially if you remove the benefits that I talked about with Sackpawn. So I do plan to, I would like to dig a little deeper into that down the road, but for right now, I'm going to need a little bit more time to sort of really hash that out. I think there's some obvious ones, right? Lanissa Rissel, Hutchuck, Swamp Gobbers, Eilish, who we'll review more thoroughly at some point. I've actually talked quite a bit about him because he went through a bunch of iterations and stuff. I think I even talked last week. He ended up releasing with his final CID rules. We will see what that means for us. I think he may have a place in some lists. Yeah, so some of the obvious ones are gonna make appearances where it makes sense, I think. We'll maybe visit that next week, though. In the meantime, I have a few topics. So I sort of put out a request for some questions. Sorry, I didn't finish going through the themes. So things that changed with the themes. Bones of Orboros added Megalith. Like I said, they all added minion unit solos as an option. We got Call of the Wild as anticipated. No changes to what we expected out of that. +1 to go first was the final bonus, of course. Secret Masters we saw a few weeks back. No change to call. The Wild Hunt, no change. No change to Devourer's Host. So at this time, at least. So themes, nothing too exciting. One big change that does, 2 big changes to other factions that do benefit us. One, the theme benefit that removes advanced deployment from models is now changed to remove ambush from models. So it's a lot more limited. It's not irrelevant by any means, but it does mean that there's just some things that don't function without AD, and Circle happens to be home of 3 of them. But the Witchwood in Grimkin, and there's something else that I'm forgetting. Racks are kind of awkward in Protectorate, and the minions got a new sort of rack thing too. So, I think that benefit going the way of the Dodo is good. So that's a buff for us in a roundabout way. Also, Oracles of Annihilation and Heavy Metal have their benefits changed to require 30 points of essentially battle group models, or I think it's probably War Beasts or War Jacks, depending, and battle engines. So now they can only get it's every 30 points, so they can only get 3 free options for the most part. So that's a little bit of a buff in a way for us, but I don't think you're going to stop seeing some of those played. They're just going to adjust their lists. Okay, so as I was starting to say, sort of ahead of what I anticipated, I did sort of put out some questions, and or I put out the note for tonight and asked if anybody had any questions. I did get a few responses. I'm probably not going to get to all of them. I actually came up with a topic after posting this that I think I want to discuss, so we're going to do that next. And then I'm going to see if some of these questions, I do know one of them was about minions though, so we'll be keeping that in mind. I think we'll revisit that after we've had a few weeks with some of these themes, as I was saying. So we'll see. There's a couple pretty interesting questions in here, though, and so we'll maybe circle back around, pun not intended, to those. But one of the topics, and this may actually lead into one of the questions toward the end of it, that I sort of thought about. It's been on my mind a little bit since some of our CID, and that is talking about the value of choosing something that is flexible. And by that, I'm sort of mean in every aspect of your list design, but I also mean even specifically in models and units. So I just want to address sort of where I'm coming from, and then I'll talk through it. So there's, especially in Mark III, there's been a lot of, and this happens with like net listing, like discussing of lists and options online. There is a lot of folks who immediately, you go directly to the numbers and you kind of like min-max them immediately, right? So what thing has the highest armor, what thing has the highest defense, what thing has the highest damage, what thing is the most accurate, what thing costs the least number of points, what has the most number of hitboxes, stuff like this. What model has the most overtly powerful spells or rules or feats, and things like that, right? There's a little more to it, but stuff like that, right? What is just going to give me, for the least number of points, the highest number in some other area, essentially. And I'm not saying that's bad, right? Definitely not the case. But a lot of times when we're doing list design, and this came up a lot with the World Watcher discussion, really made me think about this. And I'll be honest, I have not had time to practice this, to necessarily test my theories. But one of the things with drink real quick. One of the things with the World Watcher, for example, is you look at the model and you see a model for 8 points that is kind of not the best of anything. He doesn't bring, or he's sort of the best at one thing, but then like after that doesn't back it up enough. Like, so he can go to high armor. And that's sort of always been his hallmark, right? And another sub point too in this is probably, don't look at what something used to be and be sad. Look at what it is. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but I think the World Watcher, for a lot of us Circle players, has a lot of that, like, well, we know what it used to be if you ever played Bradigus in Mark II, or occasionally Baldur II, and a few other places they would pop up. But, back then it was something different, right? It had a shield guard, and the form, just the environment was very different. Bradius' synergy went higher, and things like that. And it doesn't have shield guard anymore. And I think people have kind of gotten hung up on that. But let's talk about what a piece like that brings. And I'm just going to use that one for now. We're going to talk about a bunch, though. And a piece like that, what he brings is he's the ability to be, so he has AD, fertilizer, he has a ranged attack, a decent melee attack, Mat 6, Mat 6, Rat 5, RFP on his fists, RFP on his gun, an Animus that is very relevant to your Warlock. the ability, and potentially to himself, the ability to be armor 21, and he has AD and Pathfinder. So this model is never, I'm just going to throw this out there, this model is never going to min-max anything aside from like durability by points, right? With Stone Form and his base stats and points and hitboxes, he has the potential to be the most durable like piece per points that we have at the points he's at and the durability he's at. And that's not nothing, right? So that's something to consider. But yeah, once we move past that, he's never going to check the he's never going to min max for you, right? Mat 6 is average, Rat 5 is average. And just a side note on that, Rat 5 is probably about average for stuff. There's very few Rat 6 and almost no Rat 7 in the game. Rat 5 is average. Range 10 is pretty average. Pow 12 for Light Warbeast, pretty average. Pow 12 on the Fists, Light Warbeast, pretty average, maybe slightly above in some cases, slightly below in others, making it pretty average. Armor, I already talked about the durability, but you know he's def 10, so or 5 depending on the case. But then we start talking about a few other things, right? Like I said, he has the Animus. He does have a gun. He does have RFP. He has Force Generation. He has AD, so he's always going to be, you know, able to get right up there. And you're never going to be able to like sit down and like dojo out a scenario where the most optimal thing to put in your list is the Wold Watcher, unless you're getting into a super specific scenario, because you can do it with the Animus. But you're never just gonna sit down and go like, oh, yep, it's the best choice that I could possibly have in the dojo, because it's not gonna min max enough. It's not gonna check enough. It's not gonna check enough boxes. Now, like I said, don't get me wrong, it's not gonna be right for every list, and you can probably play lists that don't have one. But let's say you need RFP. This guy can go in. Let's say you just want something that can have some potential to contribute throughout the game more. And that's sort of what I found. What a lot of people found with Bradigus and Mark II was, and yeah, the Shield Guard was super relevant a lot too, but what they found was, well, I now have this gun, and with Bradigus it could threaten 20 inches. So I have this gun that potentially has a long threat. I can boost attack and damage if I need to. I likely can get away with only boosting one of them, especially as the game goes on. I can maybe aim, or with the 15-inch threat with his feet, you can aim. And I get this Pow 12 that RFPs and drops a Forest. That's really annoying for my opponent, right? Like, do they have something that can see through that? Do they have something with Pathfinder? You know, they can kind of plan around the terrain that is there, but then all of a sudden you're like, well, I shot the front guy of your unit, and now you either have to go around this or through this, or, you know, whatever, or, you know, you shot two of them, like, okay, now you can't see me at all. And stuff like that is important, but you can't see that. Like, that's a table state thing, right? Like, you're not going to know when that's right and when it's not. So and the reason I'm talking about this is I think the hallmark of being able to win games that you might otherwise feel like you can't is to be able to make choices, right? The game at the higher level you go in the game is more about knowing what choice to make when. You're rarely, especially as you go up, going to find the situation where you just windmill slam your list down onto the table and your opponent might as well just pack their models up. But if you listen to people talk about list creation, you'd think that was the case, right? Like, well, he played paper and I played scissors, so I won. And that's just not the case. I mean, as the game progresses, like, having access to some models that give you options in your list is going to have some strength. That doesn't mean every list needs it. That doesn't mean they don't. It's just something to consider. Being flexible. And that comes down to when you're choosing what models and units you want to put into a list. So really quick, I'll just talk about an Una list that I'm currently playing, and I probably will continue to play, and Una 2. And a lot of people, with the release of the Theme Force, you can go into the Circle group and you'll see they've been playing Una 2 with a Gorax and like 12 Scarsfell's Griffins, and then the 4 free things that they can get: 2 stones, 2 blacklands. And they've been rejoicing that it has defeated the evil Khador armor spam. Cool. I'm sure it does. I have no. If you put 10 Marauders down against 12 Scarsfell's Griffins, I think the Scarsfell's Griffins probably are going to win the day. I think math probably at that point starts to skew, oddly enough, away from Khador finally, because they have to hit defense 15, and if you can position carefully right, you out-threaten them most of the time, you out-threaten them most of the time with your feet and everything. You hit hard enough that usually takes like 2 to take down a Khador Heavy, depending on how flank works. If you can get your shifting stones in a place to give you the sprints, you're going to be able to do it, right? Not a lot of flexibility in that game plan, though. And again, that doesn't mean it's bad. Scarsfell's Griffins are very good. Una 2 is very good. But you have almost no flexibility. If you play that list and they drop something that is not that armor spam, you may be in trouble. I'm not saying you absolutely will be in trouble, but you might be in trouble. What I'm proposing is, so a list I'm playing instead has been playing 7 Scarsfell's Griffins. I actually get more interesting solos for free, so I have, because of how the points work out, I've had a Druid Wilder, 2 Blackclads, 2 Shifting Stones, and that Druid Wilder may actually become Lord of the Feast or one of the minion solo options that costs 3 points, or possibly Gobbers and I Gobber Chef, just because that gives me another unit, another solo who can score for 3 points. And then I've still got the Gorax, and I'm playing the Storm Raptor. And I can already hear a bunch of people going, but why the Storm Raptor? It's so bad. Well, I still think it could use some improvement. But what it does do is brings me, first of all, a really good platform for Hand of Fate because of its gun. This is debatable. Some people would probably debate the Pure Blood in this particular list would make similar use of it, but like, I don't actually think, given Living Beasts only, that there is a better turn target for Hand of Fate, because the fact that it can buy the extra shots, it gets the extra jumps, like you're kind of always getting value out of it. If it goes in, the E-Leaps get it, melee attacks get it, it helps compensate for the Mat 5, etc. So that's one reason I put it in. But really what it does is it provides me, and so far every game that I've played it has done this, it provides me an answer to infantry. So I played this into a Scorn list that was playing, sorry I'm doing math on the fly, but let's see, 22, another 30, 38, I think there was another unit. I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 40 warrior models and a couple heavies. Not counting things like, I don't know if it had Pain Givers, but if it did, it didn't count. That's not counting those. And I was able to handle the fact that he had infantry because I had a lot of infantry because I had that gun. And, some folks are going to say like, well, you've got 3 initials on the Scarsfells, that should be enough. Well, against a KG opponent, you can space out stuff so that I'm not going to be able to easily get a Griffin on more than 1 or 2 models. And yeah, I have, if I have 12, like I mentioned, I can take out, let's say, 15 models, maybe 20 if they're spaced very poorly, and then they all die to the other 20. The Storm Raptor gave me something that was a late game threat, was able to sit back at 12 inches and just shoot. Most of the time I could aim even. I was shooting at brigands that were dug in at Rat 10, a couple of them, because they got close enough for me to use Skyfire. If I went in, I had the E-Leaps, and there's other ways to do this, right? Like I said, the Pureblood plan might have some similar benefit, but this allowed my list to be has allowed my list to be very flexible. I would say, like, sometimes when you're looking at min-maxing a list, right, like something like, I don't really like this model where its stats currently are, but I would be tempted at times with like a Kaya 3 Beast Spam to put, if I was in the Living Beast theme again, to put a Winter Argus in a list, possibly 2. And you're probably again going, but it's so bad. And like I honestly do think that the Winter Argus needs probably like 2 changes, and it's going to be made, and it would be fantastic. But what it does bring is a gun, and sometimes what you need is a gun to clear some stuff off, and it's still boostable. I know it's only Rat 4, but it is boostable. So, and on the other side, he still has the same 2 POW 12s that a Wild Argus has for only one more point. So yeah, I don't get the combo strike, but honestly, I don't use that a lot. You do lose the Animus, but I'm not suggesting you're playing them instead of Wild Arguses. I'm suggesting you might play one along with a Wild Argus, which again might end up changing, the math on the ranged attack. You could do a Moonhound and adjust it as such too. Again, it's going to provide you with flexibility. Looking at your beast loadout and seeing, like, does redundancy make sense here, or does flexibility, right? You could do, in almost any list, you could do 2 Purebloods. For the same points, you could do a Pureblood and Brenos. Why would you do that? Purebloods have sprays. They're so much more amazing. Well, Brenos is Magic Ability 7 instead of Rat 5, so that means he's going to be, you have to aim to get to that with the Pureblood. They're both Fury 4. His is an AoE that turns off range attacks, but he can boost that AoE damage. And the Pureblood has to get up there and spray. I would say in a vacuum, the Pureblood's probably a lot of times a better beast, but I think in the right cases that Brenos, he's also got Reach, he has Pathfinder, things like that. I think Brenos actually is going to bring something different to a list that might be valuable. I'm not saying every list, but might be valuable, right? As we look at some of the other themes, some models just are going to have more flexibility. I think Thrawn Ravagers on their own, relatively flexible. POW 13s aren't amazing, but you can put them onto some, mediumly armored targets, especially with the debuff, and get some work done. You can also put them into infantry and use your mini feat and clear them out. Now, I don't think it would be the end of the world if Ravagers were more focused toward dealing damage, right? Because we have the Tharn are actually very flexible in general, a lot of their units, but it's something to consider. Wolf Riders, something else I've been playing, and I like them with Una 2 as well, different lists. And I do think that they need usually a damage buff of some kind, but one of the things with them that's amazing is they're really fast, they can flank. They also have an impact attack, or an additional melee attack if you don't charge. They have reposition, they have a ranged attack, they have a melee attack. They're weapon masters in melee, they're weapon masters with their throw. They have Pathfinder and our normal rules. And what that means is there's some, because they can throw 7 and back up 5, they're sort of the equivalent of a range 12 gun, loosely speaking. And what that means is, in some instances, the correct move is just going to be to throw them back up. Just, sandpaper infantry off. And that's great, because it's an option they have. And in other games, you're going to be like, I need to put them on this heavy. So that's another example of playing with something that's flexible. Some things that are not really flexible, not just to make sure I'm giving both sides of the example, are a Feral Warpwolf, not flexible, right? He has basically one job, which is kill that thing and provide primal. So sorry, just 2 jobs, but they're both very inherently straightforward. Getorix, he has some minor, he has some things that he can do that are minor. He's a beat stick. That's what Getorix does, and you need these things in your list sometimes. Trying to think of a few more examples. Wolves Warboros to a degree, pretty straightforward, right? Skinwalkers to a degree. Pretty straightforward. Bloodweavers and Druids are starting to get in there where you've got a little bit more flexibility. And it's not just in the unit, but in what you construct your list out of, right? Something like a Wold Warden with Kruger 2 is automatically going to bring him more flexibility because he has 3 spells they can cast. Someone like Megalith going into any list is that you wouldn't necessarily expect him in, right? Like maybe in a Wild Hunt list, or I guess that would be, no, he can't go in that either. Well, you could with Baldur. Anyway, something like Megalith going into a list is, again, like raw, like points math, he's probably not the, like he's maybe not as efficient as just bringing another Guardian or Warden, but he does bring you some more flexibility. Specifically with his Animus, he's a little more accurate. He has healing. Again, very, very good choice. And not just going like, oh, well, this, like, Chad just mentioned that Wold Wardens are, really strong with Kruger 2. I'm just going to play all Wold Wardens. Well, that may work in that case, but you might also just be better off if you brought like a Fulcrum and some Old Weirds and some Old Wardens and Shifting Stones and a Gallows Grove. You're like, well, but the Gallows Grove is just really bad and it dies. And you're like, yeah, but what about that game where I trade that 2-point model with the TK for their, Thorn, which happened in a game I played. Or you get Rebuke out on their Shield Wall unit and they're real sad because it's just going to stay there unless they have Eilish. Stuff like that, right? It's being flexible has strengths. And when you're evaluating pieces, try putting some of those pieces that look on paper like they don't, like they're the jack of all trades, master of none. Put some of the, once in a while, try to put one of those on the table and just see what happens. Just, play 3 or 4 or 5 games with it and just see what uses you had for it. I go back to the Wold Watcher. A lot of people in CID and a couple episodes ago, Pagani and I talked about this. A lot of people were like, well, all it did was be arm 21 in the zone. I'm like, well, you never lost that zone then? Like, that's kind of huge right now. Not to mention, because of where he's at on the table, if that's the case, either people have completely given up a zone, at which point you played 8 points for that. If I could play 8 points to not lose a zone, I would. Almost certainly. In some lists I would. So like you probably value right there. So, and then add in the fact that he's probably going to be able to aim with his gun or walk, boost the gunshot and then Stoneform. Like that's value. There's still something it did. Not every piece is going to just be flashy all the time and do amazing stuff. Like it's just about having the little things work the way you need them to. And games don't play out as neat and pretty as we talk about online either. Like going back to my Una list, I recently won a game. One of the games I won with her, I ended up killing. It was against a Wanderer list. I ended up killing the Wanderer basically with Electro Leaps off of the Storm Raptor onto his Skin and Moans. And I also earlier in the game killed a Gorehound with Electro Leaps. So, like, and when were you ever, like, looking at when were you ever, like, theorizing the Storm Raptor and you're like, you know what it's probably going to do? Assassinate their Warlock with Electro Leaps in melee. Stuff like that happens in games, though, all the time. And it's just about you need to know the rules for your models, too. So if you're going to an event, obviously you need to study the rules for things. But then knowing when to make what choices is really critical. And the more pieces you have that allow you more choices, the better off you are. Warlocks are really straightforward, really obvious example of this. Someone like Kruger 2 or Wormwood is going to obviously provide you with more choices turn over turn than, say, a Chromac 2, right? I love Chromac 2, but your choices with him are more about positioning and more about how much he should contribute, where he needs to be, and if he should cast his spells and stuff. And that's good. With Kruger 2, it's like, what thing do I need to TK? Can I get away with not casting Windstorm? Do I need to Gallows? Does this Warden need to Gallows? Should Lightning Storms be spread around? and so forth. Like, where can I get rebuke? A lot of choices. Yeah. And just as a quick corollary to this, I don't want to hammer this into, but part of this also goes to, I just want to point out, I've gotten into many debates with many people in many different places about the idea that, and I haven't directly worded it this way, but I think I'm going to, and I think I also, Tim Banky, I think, also worded it like this on a podcast I listened to, and that is, if you're playing Circle, you are not playing a faction where you thought, like, I'm going to get my win through mathematics, through sheer force of volume of something in my faction. Like, that is not what you started playing this faction to do. If you did, I have several other factions I'm going to recommend to you. Like Khador, Trolls to a degree, like stuff like that. If you were looking at this faction as something where you didn't have to earn your victories in a lot of senses, then that's not going to really make sense. So again, I go back to having those tools and those options, and that flexibility is something that's going to be very key for you. That also means try to design your lists to maximize the ability to win by any of the means you have available to you. And that means scenario, assassination, attrition, or, as much as you can out of those. You're not always going to get all of them, but so I think I'm going to leave that essentially where it is. Also, I was talking about flexibility. Comment in the chat does say not to forget there's a crit effect on Winter Argus. I don't really tend to recommend crit fishing, but every once in a while you're going to be able to throw something out, be stationary, and your opponent's going to be pretty sad. So I want to lead this into one of the questions somebody asked. A guy named Brian asked about, with the theme drop, he no longer feels that he knows what lists he's trying to beat. What do the other factions have we need a plan for, he says. And I'm going to lead the discussion I just had sort of into this. And instead of thinking about what does each, because we'll start to see that as it shakes out. What do the other factions have that I need to be able to beat? I'm going to say, let's talk about what archetypes you need to be able to handle with your two lists. And right now, first thing to do is divorce yourself from this idea that it's an armor spam game, that it's Warjacks everywhere. It's not. That's over. That's not the case anymore. There are still lists that do that, but don't just assume that all my lists need to be able to beat armor. The end. You will not have a good time in most tournaments, I think, if you do that. So, here's the things that I think, and this is off the top of my head, this is not necessarily exhaustive, but here's the archetypes that are out there. There is still, obviously, Warjack spam. That's both heavy and lights, decently well armored, and I'm going to say not easy to shoot. Let's go with that. Shoot down at range. So there's still those lists. There's still some lists running with 10 Marauders. Amon is still pretty popular in Protectorate. There's some lists in Retribution that play a lot of Jacks. Mercenaries are still playing plenty of lists with plenty of Jacks. They still exist. I don't think you're gonna still see Legion and Scorn playing a decent amount of Beasts as well. Grimkin playing a decent amount of Beasts. And those, there's going to be, out of what I just said, a decent number who have decent number of boxes and a decent armor stat. So you need to be prepared for how to handle those things. You also should be prepared for dealing with ranged attacks. So you should still, and this is again going to be the gamut, right? There's going to be some higher power ranged attacks, more high quality ranged attacks, and there's also going to be volume of attacks with things like units. So like Ghost Fleet falls into the latter, where Somebody like Nemo 3 might be part of the former. Or Lilith 2 I've seen here and there. Rasheth likes to shoot quite a bit actually too. Things like that. You need to be able to kill infantry. And by that, I mean you need to, if they brought 50 models, you need a plan for that. If they brought highly armored infantry, you need a plan for that. If they brought stealth infantry, you need a plan for that. If they brought cavalry, I would say it's still probably a good idea to have a plan for cavalry. And specifically, I will get a little more specific in this, but specifically Storm Lances, Bane Riders, if you have a Protector player, Flamebringers. You'll occasionally see Ulans and Protector ones. I can't think of the Avengers. Maybe Desters. You're probably going to start seeing things. You may start seeing Tuffaloes again. You're certainly going to see Cats in Scorn. You need a plan for these type of models. I would suggest that some kind of RFP and or Grievous Wounds is going to be a strong element that you'll get more out of than you realize. You need to be able to handle things if they're higher defense. Legion, poster child for this problem. Fianna 2, defense 17 heavies on a particular turn, and their defense 14 the other turns. Incredibly difficult to deal with. Circle, mirror match, higher defense a lot of the time. The defensive values in things like Crix and Crimkin are a little bit above the thing. Madrak 1, I think, is going to be a big deal soon. So again, you're going to need to think about what you do into defense. Cloud walls, pretty common. Have a plan for a cloud wall. I do think as far as in the very short term, I think Crix is going to continue to rise. There's no reason to see it stop. It just got 6 theme forces. The 2 it was playing were fantastic. The one it wasn't playing was good. The ones they added are good. None of their casters have been touched, and their themes got more options. I think we will continue to see Crix. Signar may dwindle a little bit, but it's still like the most popularly bought faction. They're not going anywhere. But I would say this is not the time to start, depending on the timing of CIDs, to start like dismissing factions that they won't be there. I don't really expect minions until their stuff starts being released, but like Trollbloods are probably going to get their dynamic update any day now, and I think they're going to start to rise a bit. I think Scorn is on the rise. I think most of Hordes is slowly on the rise. I think we're seeing some of the folks who were playing Khador, I think that's starting to level off a little. I think some of the Signar players are maybe going to level off a little just because, they've kind of gotten hit over the last year, and sometimes you need to walk away when that happens and sort of regroup. Protector, it's gotten some good stuff, but I don't really see a lot of people like drifting to it. Mercs are never going to be that big. Convergence, same. Ret, sort of the same. I actually think Ret's fantastic, but they don't seem to be catching on as much as others. So that's kind of there. But you really do need to be able to handle a lot of things. You need to know what list can handle which, so that you want to try to avoid, and this is not always going to work, but you want to try to avoid a list chicken scenario. I'm going to use some of the popular examples. You don't want to go into Crix with a list. If you don't want to play list chicken with Crix, you need your list to be able to handle Banes in Dark Host and Ghost Pirates in Ghost Fleet. Your list needs to have a plan into both of those. Circle certainly has ways of doing that, but you need to have a plan into it. And again, going back to my point, don't assume that you're just going to be able to be like, well, I got those guys answered, blam, and just cakewalk the game. It's not going to happen. We have probably the most access to RFP and magic weapons of any faction in the game, and generally ranged protection that Crix doesn't ignore, and generally the ability to kill infantry, and we still at WTC did not come close to having a winning rate against Crix. So that should tell you something. You're going to need to play these games, and they're not going to be easy. Assuming you have equal players, of course. Into Signar, you're still going to need to be able to, worry about guns, mix, combine arms, things like that. Protector, it really depends where they go. But again, they can play highly resilient infantry. They can play some shooting infantry that hits pretty hard. They can play some hard-hitting melee infantry. They can play cavalry. They can play jacks. They can play range attacks on jacks. I have a plan for all those things. And the plan doesn't always need to be out attrition them. You play circle. Learn the scenarios in 2017. They are a godsend to our faction. Look at ways to spread them out. Bricks are hard for us to break. Don't try. Attack them from the sides. Attack them in odd ways. Use the terrain as much as you can. Right, like things like this. But yeah, so that's kind of a high level look. It's kind of, I tried to be a little more generic there because I think there are some specific things to worry about. I think, like I said, Crix is the most relevant at this very current moment. I don't know if it will 100% stay that way. And whatever is prevalent in your meta, right, that's the thing you should worry the most about. So I actually, if I wanted to, I'm planning to go to War Machine Weekend, so I'm sort of thinking about Crix a lot. But historically speaking, where I live, I don't see a ton of them. Pardon me. In Mark II, I didn't see a ton. In Mark III, I haven't seen a ton. I haven't had to deal with it as much. And I suppose, I'm somewhat lucky, but I just haven't, in general played into a lot of the power Crix lists. But I do play into Khador and Trollbloods a lot. And so I need to think about what my list is going to do into those more than a lot of other people maybe do. So that's kind of the deal with that. I'm going to look real quick at what we had for questions to see if there were any others. Sort of talked about Crix. Like I said, I think you want to bring, you want to make sure you still have magic weapons. You want to make sure that you have the possibility of RFP. You want to, and you need to be able to deal with both light infantry, Crix Jacks probably in the future, and Bane Riders. Unfortunately, I think the things that can deal with Bane Riders also deal with most Crix Jacks because they're like the buff they got is not really going to help against our melee. So like I mentioned Ravagers before, or Bloodweavers, things like that. They're going to be strong into Crix because their Warjacks are still in the lightly armored category, and who cares if they got Carapace? We're not going to shoot them. We're just going to hit them in the face. Anti-spells can be huge too. So I think Chromac 1, if you want to, I would really love to have the time to re-unlock that guy. I think that he's probably got a lot of game right now. But I have not been able to come up with a build that I love with him. I think this new theme is probably where I would start. But I haven't really thought beyond that. I'm going to mention this briefly, but there was a question on who spams Scarspells better, Kaya 3 or Una 2. My personal opinion is it's Una 2, but it's complicated. Benefits Una 2 gives, she has sprint, she has threat range extension, and she gives them flank. Flank mathematically is going to be a little bit more superior in the damage output, a little less superior in the melee. How do I say this? Like if you're getting flank, and it's not relying on hitting other models before that. Kaya, of course, gives them more defense, which can be fantastic if they don't have knockdown effects or non-targeting damage. The sprint on Una is much better than reposition 3 if you can pull it off, and if you're crafty, you'll be able to. Or you'll be able to enough. Sorry, I'm just sort of trying to remember all my thoughts on this. But basically, if you want to play a lot of only Griffins, I would play it with Una 2. if you want to play some Griffins and some other stuff, I would play it with Kaya 3. I think they're both fantastic. I think they can both be built in ways that go back to what I was saying, that are flexible, that can do a lot of things. I think that they both have strengths. I like the threat range extension on Una. I think I like Hand of Fate. That's another piece of this too. So Una does have Hand of Fate, so she changes the math a little bit. I also think Hand of Fate allows her to play more games. We were talking about spamming Scar Spells. I think Una is still the one you spam Scar Spells with. She can also keep herself safer against ranged attacks. And some of it depends on the format. If you're going to play champions, just take your Una list and try it Kaya 3. I don't see any harm in that. So that's my take. I've not played a lot of Kaya 3, I'll confess. So if others are seeing it the other way than me, that's cool. But the way I see it is I prefer Una if you're going for only Scar Spells. You start wanting to mix in some Arguses, some Satyrs, some Heavies. I start leaning toward Kaya 3 pretty quickly. Somebody asked about the WTC breakdown. I thought about going through that kind of in depth, but in reality, I feel like one of the things I mentioned Circle didn't do as well in the Crix as I expected. And a lot of the things are, I felt like we were sort of, a lot of the lists were maybe like a step behind the curve in some ways. And but there were some I liked. I do think Wormwood, Una are going to continue to be prevalent. I think I personally don't like Baldur 2. Right now, I think that, and that's partially just my style, but I think we should probably see less Baldur 2, more Kruger 2. I think we'll start to see Bradigus when the CID rolls out, but not a ton of him. I think Kaya 3, you may start to see the Chromax come back again, as I mentioned. I think Kruger 1's still pretty okay into Hours Host as well. Just double checking my thoughts. Even Tanith could possibly pop back up, I think. But they need to really be thinking about some of those things I was talking about. And I think a lot of lists weren't really paying enough attention to things like Dark Host. Yeah, what the hell? We'll hit the final question, then we'll call it. And there was a question aside from the minions part of it. Just a question about Bradigus and Bones of Ouroboros versus Kaya in Call. And sorry, I'm gonna jump back. There's a thing in the comment about Una and the Fury. Depending on the number of Griffins, I agree. I think that when you're getting up to 12, the fact that Kaya 3 has Soothing Song might start to be much more relevant. But I think if done correctly, Una 2 is still probably my preference when looking at it. And I actually do get the sprint off more than you might imagine. And that again comes with cleverly being able to position using your shifting stones and things like that. Not something I could describe to you on this terribly well. You sort of need to assess the table a lot for that. But the threat range is really the big difference to me. And the survivability. Kaya 3 being in a large base does seem trickier to keep alive, though not impossible by any means. But again, it's however you go. Anyways, Kaya 3 versus Bradigus, though, if we're talking synergy, the two synergy casters, right? One kind of wants Living Beasts more, although Kaya 3 could really play whatever. And the other one absolutely has to have Stone Beasts, so or Wolves. Which one do I think is stronger? And I think it depends a lot on what you're trying to do. I think they both have a pretty good argument to be made. I mean, in one case you're kind of skewing a little more armory, and the other case you're skewing a little bit more in the defensive range, so that's going to be a factor. I think. That said, for me personally, I'm leaning toward Bradigus, and the reason being the feat. I think Kaya 3's feat giving more defense is pretty good, but certainly, yeah, it's pretty good. But I think 5 inches of movement can be incredibly good, especially on things that are as durable and can now hit pretty hard. Kaya 3's damage is still, the output is still the absolute highest. I don't think anything, I guess Woldrath notwithstanding, goes higher than a synergied primal Getorix. But you usually don't need a synergied primal Getorix to kill stuff. The reposition on Kaya turn over turn is very good. I think back to being flexible, I think there's some flexibility she has that he doesn't have and vice versa. I think his flexibility is in bones the fact that you actually, in a lot of lists, they're going to have like 5 sprays, 5 spray 8 pot 12s. You wouldn't think about that as being a big deal, but it means you can play, if you zig when you should have zagged in your list chicken, you might be okay. You also are going to have Woldwardens who have rifts and battering rams, so you're getting more attacks out again. For Kai to do that, she has to build to do that. Like I said, you can do that with Wind Arguses, you can do it with Stalkers. I actually like Gnarlhorns with her quite a bit, especially in the new theme. So that's another big factor is what you're expecting you're going to be dropping into a lot. Like if you play into a lot of like Sorcerer 1, you might be better off actually, well, both these lists can have access to it, but like 3 Gnarlhorns and Kaya all having Earth's Blessing means that that's a potentially very sad Sorcerer 1. And they can do that for free, and she spends 1. So that's some protect there. In general, I'm enjoying Bradigus a little bit more. They're both very similar, though. A lot of it's going to come down to what you want to put more reps on the table with, I think. Threat range is better with Bradigus. I think Soothing Song means you can spend, you have more fury you might put out there. You have access to things like I said, Gnarlhorn. Stalkers, I think, are very good with her because they get both. Stalkers still hit that like flexibility point, right? Like they still hit hard in melee. They still have Berserk, so they can kill a lot of dudes, and then sprint is very strong when you don't have to pay for it. So I think they hit a lot of points I like with her as well. The Living Lights obviously have a lot of strengths, things like that. I think you will still have an easier time trading into Khador Heavies and things of the like with Kaya 3. But I think Bradigus can do it too. So I think in the end it comes down to personal preference. I'm leaning a little bit more towards Bradigus myself. And really the answer is what's the format, right? They're both in Champions, but I don't know what that's going to look like in a few, at the turn of the year. So, sometimes having 2 things that sort of can do a similar thing starts to make a big difference once you turn that page. So, anyways, this episode's actually gone pretty decently long, so we're gonna start to wrap it up. As always, I would like to thank my sponsors, Muso Minis. I'm pretty sure I'll see them at War Machine Weekend, so check them out if you're there. They keep letting me post stuff, and I'm very gracious for that. And I really enjoy using their all of their products as well. The ones I use anyways. The tokens and measuring utility implements, stuff like that. So it was awesome. And then of course Griffin's Roost Painting. If you want some pretty models, I have some pretty models that are from Griffin's Roost Painting, and if you want them, check out Griffin's Roost Painting on Facebook or griffinsroostpainting.com, and you can see what that's all about. And then until next week, unless we get any news, we'll maybe be back to something of our normal format. Just a quick update, I have been looking into the audio thing still. I tried something last weekend that did not work, so when I get a chance, I'll take another stab at that. And try maybe next week to get back to our usual format. I think we've got 4 or 5 things we haven't talked about, so we'll try to get through those. As I play some lists more, might be more discussion on that. Yeah. So anyways, thanks for watching.